the world, they were the ultimate power couple, the king of cool and the queen of grace. But behind the doors of their Malibu mansion, Ali MacGraw wasn't living a fairy tale. She was living a nightmare where every move was watched, every script was burned, and a loaded gun was used to keep her in line. At 85, Ali is finally ready to reveal the hell she survived. You see, Hollywood has an incredible talent for manufacturing legends and burying the bodies required to build them. For decades, the public worshipped at the altar of Steve McQueen. He was the rugged, untouchable icon of masculinity, a man who could command the screen without saying a single word. But the heavy price of that silence was entirely paid by the women trapped in his orbit, none more so than the woman who sacrificed everything for him. To truly understand the gravity of this nightmare, you have to rewind your mind to the early 1970s, a time when Ali MacGraw was sitting on top of the world. She had just starred in Love Story, a monumental cultural phenomenon that cemented her as the single most sought-after actress in all of Hollywood. She was married to Robert Evans, the legendary head of Paramount Pictures, a man who gave her unprecedented power, vast influence, and total security. She was literally royalty in the film industry. But then came 1972, and a little gritty movie called The Getaway. Ali had almost turned the role down. She had a newborn son at home, and her intuition was screaming at her that getting involved with Steve McQueen would be a catastrophic mistake. But the studio pushed, and eventually, she found herself on location in the sweltering heat of Texas. The contrast between her powerful executive husband and McQueen was intoxicating to her. While Robert Evans was all Hollywood ego, constantly preening and talking box office numbers in expensive suits, McQueen was sitting quietly in the corner, wearing faded Levi jeans, exuding a calm, wildly dangerous charisma. Ali later admitted that from the moment he stepped into her world, she was utterly obsessed. There was literally not enough air in the room for her to breathe. Blinded by passion, she threw away her marriage, her stability, and effectively set fire to her perfectly curated life just to be with him. They married in 1973, and the public and the press devoured the narrative of two beautiful A-list stars colliding in true romance. But almost immediately after the rings were exchanged, the trap snapped shut. The man who was universally celebrated for being a free-spirited rebel on camera was, in brutal reality, a deeply insecure and tyrannically controlling figure behind closed doors. McQueen was haunted by a profoundly traumatic childhood. Abandoned by his father and severely abused by a stepfather who literally threw him down a flight of stairs, McQueen developed a deep-seated hatred and fundamental distrust of women. He brought that raw, unhealed trauma directly into his marriage with Ali. First, he initiated absolute financial and professional control. Despite the fact that Ali MacGraw was at the absolute peak of her earning potential and global popularity, McQueen laid down a strict, non-negotiable ultimatum. She was no longer allowed to act. The biggest, most confident movie star in the world could not handle the idea of his own wife having independent success. He disguised this suffocating demand as a desire for a traditional, normal family life, but it was purely about subjugation. He forced her to reject every single script that came her way, literally burning her professional bridges in the industry. But he didn't stop at just killing her career. Before they walked down the aisle, McQueen systematically forced Ali to sign one of the most draconian prenuptial agreements in Hollywood history. The terms were brutally simple. If they ever divorced, she would walk away with absolutely nothing. Not a single dime of his massive fortune, completely stripped of any assets, leaving her with only the clothes in her closet. She signed it willingly at the time, deeply blinded by love and falsely believing it was just his fragile masculine ego needing some temporary reassurance. She didn't realize she was signing her own financial death warrant. With her legendary career completely dead and her financial independence erased, McQueen moved them to a secluded home in Malibu, effectively turning her into a high society hostage. They lived like hermits. Her friends were terrified to even call the house because if McQueen answered the phone, he would be overtly hostile and aggressively irritable. He was systematically cutting off her support network, executing a classic textbook maneuver of domestic abusers. He isolated her from her peers, her directors, and her past, ensuring that he was the only son in her ever-shrinking universe. But if you think the isolation and the financial ruin were the darkest parts of this story, you are gravely mistaken. Because what happened late at night, in the dead silence of their isolated Malibu fortress, pivots this story from a tragedy of a broken marriage into a terrifying psychological thriller. And it involves a 30-minute torture session that the Hollywood machine has actively tried to erase from the history books. Let me ask you, what would you do if the man you sacrificed your entire existence for suddenly locked the doors, turned off the lights, and casually pointed a loaded gun directly at your head? Because that is exactly what happened, and the reason why will make your blood run cold. By 1976, McQueen's mind was rapidly deteriorating into a highly toxic cocktail of paranoia, substance abuse, and obsessive jealousy. Following the tragic Manson family murders years earlier, McQueen had become fanatical about personal security. He began carrying a loaded weapon on him at all times, a terrifying accessory that only amplified the daily threat of his explosive temper. His Jekyll and Hyde syndrome was absolutely terrifying. They would go days living in what seemed like peaceful, quiet domestic bliss, only for McQueen to suddenly snap into a blind, vicious rage over absolutely nothing. One night, this dark paranoia reached a horrifying climax. Convinced that Ali was cheating on him, a wild delusion fueled entirely by his own massive insecurities, McQueen initiated a brutal, military-style interrogation. He held a loaded gun to her head for 30 agonizing minutes. Half an hour of sheer, unadulterated terror. He demanded that she confess to affairs that simply never happened. He screamed at her, relentlessly interrogated her, and used the very real, immediate threat of pulling the trigger to completely break her down psychologically. Imagine the toll of staring down the cold barrel of a gun, held by the exact man who forced you to give up your entire identity. The ultimate, sickening irony of his obsessive jealousy was that McQueen himself was a notorious, unapologetic serial cheater. While he was locking Ali away and threatening her life over imaginary betrayals, he was flagrantly stepping out on their marriage. While filming The Towering Inferno, he began a highly publicized affair with model Lauren Hutton. He didn't even try to hide it from anyone. He would take his mistresses to the exact same restaurants he frequented with Ali. He would come home and cruelly describe intimate sexual details about other women, comparing them to his wife just to shatter her self-esteem even further. He demanded perfect, unwavering loyalty from a woman he treated like a prisoner, while he roamed the world doing whatever he pleased. The psychological destruction of Ali MacGraw was methodical, intentional, and absolute. She later confessed that only half of her was allowed to live during that marriage. She completely made up a fabricated version of a woman she thought would appeal to him, and systematically hid her true self from the world. But burying your soul comes at a very steep price. To cope with the daily reality of being trapped with a volatile, armed, and wildly unfaithful tyrant, Ali sought the only desperate escape available to her. She turned to heavy alcohol consumption. What started as a mild coping mechanism quickly spiraled into severe dependency. She admitted that she was drinking at least a bottle of wine every single night just to numb the pure anguish of her existence. She was drowning in the horrifying realization that she had sacrificed a historic film career and a beautifully stable life for a man who actively enjoyed breaking her down. When the emotional abuse occasionally spilled over into physical violence, she became an expert at covering the bruises with heavy makeup and lying to the few friends she still had left. Friends would notice distinct, finger-shaped bruises on her arms after one of his jealous fits, and she would quickly dismiss them as clumsy household accidents. She was actively protecting the very monster who was destroying her, flawlessly playing the role of the devoted Hollywood wife while internally screaming for a way out. By 1978, the glittering illusion completely shattered. The marriage was utterly beyond saving, and Ali finally found the desperate, necessary courage to leave. But remember that ironclad prenuptial agreement? It was legally enforced to the exact letter. Ali MacGraw, once the most powerful, highest-paid actress in Hollywood, walked away from the king of cool entirely broke. She had no home, no money, and a career that had been ice-cold for half a decade. The industry had rapidly moved on without her. She was forced to swallow her immense pride and practically beg for whatever small television roles she could find, eventually taking a stint on Dynasty, just to put food on the table and survive. Her journey back to the light was absolutely grueling. She hit rock bottom, cycling through severe depression until 1986, when she finally checked herself into the Betty Ford Center. It was there she bravely confronted not just her rampant alcoholism, but her crippling dependency on toxic, controlling men. She underwent intense, incredibly painful therapy to unlearn the dangerous survival mechanisms she had developed during her hellish years, trapped with McQueen. Meanwhile, Steve McQueen never managed to conquer his own towering demons. Just 2 years after their bitter divorce, he tragically passed away from cancer at the age of 50. Ali, reflecting on their deeply tragic dynamic many years later, stated simply that she wished they had both grown old sober. It is a profound, breathtaking statement of forgiveness from a woman who survived an unimaginable crucible. The story of Ali MacGraw and Steve McQueen is a stark, incredibly necessary reminder that the glossy, perfect veneer of Hollywood is often painted over deep, dark rot. We are socially conditioned to worship the idea of the cool, rebellious leading man, but we rarely stop to ask who exactly pays the toll for that rebellion. Ali MacGraw survived being systematically erased, entirely financially ruined, and literally held at gunpoint, and at 85 years old, her survival and resilience is the true, lasting legacy of this story. She didn't just survive Steve McQueen, she completely outlived his manufactured myth. But if you think McQueen's dark side was a singular Hollywood anomaly, you have no idea how deep this industry's shadows truly go. Because what happened behind the iron gates of another legendary Hollywood icon's estate makes this story look like child's play. If you want to know the horrifying truth they permanently buried about that, you need to hear this next story right now.